All right, you guys, welcome to another episode of Car Talk where we discuss everything in our car scene, our industry, our culture, and our community. I'm your host, Big Mike, right here with.
Ryan Bossery from Rywire.
And today we are going to continue off of the episode that we did called What Makes a Build Go From Good to Great. Okay. I mean, that's a subject that so many people have brought up to us in informally, formally, directly, indirectly
For a long time now.
for a very long time.
Not
and
just from last episode.
correct.
Years and years.
Yeah, and that's a question that we asked ourselves when we were coming up, right? It's a good question to ask because it helps you put your finger on what you're trying to do next. Okay, what are you trying to accomplish, right? And we've got all the questions from you guys, and we are going to kind of address it. Some people asked for more specific examples. Some of you guys asked to just kind of continue to just really elaborate. So we're going to do that, right? So, I mean, Ryan, you and I were discussing that, and there were a couple of examples and details and individual builds that you felt were examples that we could use, right?
Right.
So which ones come to your mind?
Like since last episode, just random stuff just kind of dawn on you, like, oh, that car was really good, or
Okay.
something triggers something.
Yes.
Right? And Ryan Durr's EK, which let's call it the Airbag Club EK, because
Yes.
that's his, Honda Tech name back in the day. That specific car, that specific build, it was a wide EK, with the Long Beach Pearl blue
Yeah.
interior.
Yeah, the
right?
interior was that back in the day when people were doing a lot of two-tone.
Two-tone, but it was two-tone in the right way, in the sense of, ordinary to less ordinary, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Right? So you do like the loud color inside the car.
Yes.
And then you do the mild color outside of the car. And I like it when stuff gets like flipped on its head, when you have unconventional colors and palettes that kind of do different things.
Yes.
So, I mean, that car was amazingly done. And for its time, definitely a game changer. Just, kind of in the era of kind of starting to bring back the body kits. Because
Sure.
we were at a point where a body kit was blasphemy for a Honda for a good, you can call it like 10 years of like that JDM where everything was, oh, but it's a Japanese front bumper, so that makes it cool, right?
Sure.
This was right at the cusp of like people dabbling with maybe a Japanese specific bumper or something like that. And that kind of coming around again in full circle. Now I could say that, like when you see a body kitted Civic, it's not like good or bad at this point in time, but this is right when that was phasing back in.
Sure.
The fact that it was just a B series, which at that point in time, the hype was like go K.
Yes.
Right.
That was when it was like beginning.
It was beginning. So
but it was still very expensive, so that's why people weren't all doing it back then.
Sure. And like some people just didn't want a K.
Sure.
Right. I remember like Nima from ATS was one of the first EK K-swap cars that I saw. And if we're just talking EKs right now. And I mean, the car was great.
Yeah, Nima's car was
Extreme
beautiful.
Attention to detail. The Red Zone guys did an amazing job putting that car together. But then you got Durr's car with a B.
Yes.
Right? And, it's like the color of the interior was brought in. Well, he did different valve covers, but, like at one point, it kind of that color was brought into the bay. Well, into the bay, but into like a valve cover, into different areas. So it's like what you don't expect, right? Inside of the car and engine bay, all perfectly colored, aside from these guys that maybe their car was red and then they painted it white and then you pop the hood and now you're like, oh, well, that's the original red.
Yes.
This is like not an original color
Yes.
to an original outside color.
Yes.
Everything was done at once. There was thought process behind that. It was 100% deliberately done.
But it showed.
Yeah, like
the thought process for what sounds kind of crazy: white exterior, Long Beach blue pearl interior,
yeah.
engine bay, this and that. But when you guys look up the car, which please you can look up Airbag Club, Ryan EK, you'll find it. NWP, Honda Tech. There are images of this car out there,
Super Street,
and you'll be able to get a feel for what Ryan's talking about right now.
And you see that car and you go, You're never gonna ever think like, oh well, he painted the interior color because and his car was already white. Like
Right.
never you would think that. You would go, okay, he deliberately did everything that he did, and he had his reason for why he did that. So like for example, uh, I know this because it's a car that I did, and I had that thought process and that idea is that when I did my orange Integra, there was certain I had a theme. Okay, so Ryan Durr also had a
A
theme
theme.
that he was trying to achieve. So when I was doing the Integra, I was like, okay, there's a way that I want this to look. I deliberately want certain things to be certain colors, right? The theme was the GT3 RS orange. I wanted the vinyl graphic on the side to be black, and I wanted it to say Rywire. I wanted it to be the theme of a GT3,
Yes.
right? I also wanted like the mirrors to be black because they were black on the GT3.
Yes.
I wanted the front lip to have the bottom part of it to be black, and then the everything up to be orange because that's exactly how it is in the GT3.
Yeah.
I wanted the highlight color of the yellow
Yes.
because there was highlight colors on the GT3.
On a GT3.
So I mean, dude, you could just go to town with renderings and color choices and patterns. It's like when you're designing your kitchen in your house. You're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I want things to contrast and this should be all white here, but then the handle should be this color, this should be that." So, it's really like it's fun to do,
Yes.
and you really have to like have it all down on paper, and it has you have to see the end before you could see before you start the beginning.
You guys, this is an interesting example that Ryan brings up because, there are going to be people who are going to look up that car and just see, I see a two-tone Civic. And so when you really look it over, you'll start to understand what he's saying about how you can tell that it was done on purpose. Because we all know the people who've gotten wraps or paint jobs. I mean, wraps in the last 5-7 years, but before it was paint jobs. But when they pop the hood, we all know that engine bay was the color of what the car was, and they just didn't pull the motor to do the paint job. Or someone like pulls up the carpet in the trunk and it's a different color. That's entirely different than opting for two colors and making it flow that way. And then the Integra, you look at it, and I think a lot of people sort of were like, why does it have a yellow valve cover? But if you started to look, you would find these different pieces of yellow, which started to tie in. But when you understand that it's very much modeled after a GT3 Porsche, then that all makes even more sense.
Yeah.
Color coordination is a simple yet oddly difficult thing for some people, right?
Also tying stuff together.
Yes.
Like
yes.
on your Prelude, you had, well, let's call it for the SEMA look,
Okay.
right? Because that's when we first saw the graphic, which it doesn't have.
Oh,
right
the
now.
Martini livery.
So
yeah.
let's say that you have this Martini livery on the car, and then you could put it on there in one spot and it like makes sense, right? But if you can incorporate that palette or color or even just the stripe
Yes.
somewhere else,
Yes.
then it actually goes a long way.
Yes.
So, for example, you tied it into your valve cover where you just
Yes.
had those 3 lines on your valve cover. And then now it's like, yeah, if you see just the valve cover, you just see Martini like colors, and it's like, it looks cool.
Mm-hmm.
But then you notice the outside of the car, and then maybe you notice the outside first and you haven't seen the bay yet.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, here we go.
Yes.
This is like all tied together now.
Yes.
So those little tiny things are like kind of huge. And that to me, like, makes a build from ordinary to a little bit less ordinary.
Yes.
So that's
yes.
one of the ways to make a build from good to
To
something great.
To great. Ryan, brought up his Integra in my car. The only reason why I would even use that as an example is because I'm speaking from experience, right? I see other people's cars, and I actually think they probably did put time and effort into it. But we're just talking about different ones that tend to stand out. Like, let's say, for example, he talked about the Prelude, right? So the Martini livery has 2 different shades of blue and red, right? And that stripe is very iconic for those people who follow that type of automotive racing and whatnot. And so that's why I kind of, decided to do something that would be very much not utilized on a Japanese car, right? You just wouldn't think Martini. I mean, that's European, okay? But it's one of the most famous race liveries ever.
Yeah.
And so that's why I did it. And I also thought that I could tie it in very nicely. But, my brakes in the front and the rear have two different shades of blue. The Martini Racing blue ties into the valve cover, which ties into the intake filter that I was using at the time, which ties into the Honda oil filter, which all is visible in the engine bay. So you have the oil filter, the intake, and the valve cover. So you have some kind of fluidity and symmetry. And then the sides of the car, the brake calipers, and there is also the AccuSump, right? The Canton AccuSump,
Yeah, it's
which
also
in the
blue.
back of my car, there's a rear seat delete slash, like, Canton mount slash fuel mount. Like this, the whole back half of the car internally is custom as far as the flow and the placement. And there's the AccuSump. So right when you think you don't have any more blue and you either see all gray or all black, in another place you'll get blue. And so that's how it's all tied together.
And even your fuel line stuff,
Even
it
the
has
fuel- okay.
the little blue tracers.
So I used Vibrant Performance lines, and when I was putting things together, when I was looking for things, I was thinking about Vibrant items, but they have two options, right? There's a black with a red tracer and a black with a blue tracer on the line. And I was like, that's it. That's perfect, right? So even on the fuel system, when you open the trunk and you look in there, you have your fuel surge tank, you have your inline fuel filters, pumps, and all that. But even the black braided line, it has black AN ends, but the line has blue, and it's tied in literally everywhere. Now, could you go over the top with blue or yellow or orange? Oh yes, right? You can start to just paint this and use this color stitching and anodize that. And at some point in time, it might be too much.
I have a good example of a car that I would have thought on paper would have gone crazy and I would have hated it.
Okay.
Like with an accent color. And that was ATS On's car.
Okay.
Right?
Here we go. This is a really good example.
Because if you were to just tell somebody, I have a like murdered out all black DC2 Type R.
Yes.
Right? And but I have all the accents of candy teal.
Candy teal. Do you guys remember this car? Bay Area, ATS garage again, but his name was On. It was a black ITR, and it had candy teal accents. Does that stand out to you guys? If it doesn't, you got to look it up because Ryan's bringing up a really good example.
Yeah, like I was like, oh no, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do candy teal.
Don't do that. Don't do that. And then when it was done, it's like you can't take your eyes off of it. It like
beautiful.
Turned out so good.
Beautiful.
They chose all the right components to do that color.
Yes,
I think, and it was not overbearing, and it just like it had the engine bay at least. I mean, the whole car was amazing, but the engine bay had like a presence.
A great presence, absolutely. So you guys, that presence doesn't come from candy teal. Candy teal is an example of how
accentuates it.
Yeah, it's on paper. You're like, you did what to an ITR? You powder coated how many pieces in candy teal? But when that car was out, nobody looked at it and was like, oh, there's too much of it here. There's too much of it there, or there's not enough. I mean, you have a fresh black paint job, which black cars, did you guys ever notice that back in the day on magazines, almost never was there a black car on the cover of a magazine? Because no matter how good it was, it didn't really just pop. And you had, of course, photography issues, reflections, and this and that, right? But the point is black cars are some of the most beautiful when they're clean and their paint is good, but they tend to fly under the radar. Now, taking candy teal to it is one way to definitely make it not fly under the radar, but it would have been too easy to mess that up and go too far. But that car did not do that. It had a fantastic presence, and you would walk, and no one walked by and just kept walking. You just stopped and looked at it.
Everybody.
So a build like that, it is maybe the color or something on the outside that brings you in, but it's the details that keep you there. And details are kind of what we're talking about here because, okay, so let's go, for example, with you guys. I travel all over the country pre-COVID. I mean, even during COVID, I've done a little bit, but to judge and host car events such as Mims Honda Day in London. Ryan's been as well, and Tuner Evolution Car Show Series. I'm the host of the IBOC Honda Meet, now called the Honda Meet. with I call him Buff Ryan. And so you have meat style, JDM style, clean style, and then uh, over the top style, right? You know, from the show circuit. And every single event, I've mentioned this before, every single event that I've ever judged at, there's always at least one, sometimes a few, but at least one person or group of people that comes up and stops me and asks, why didn't I win? Okay.
Or maybe not in so many words. But
Maybe not in
that's
so many
pretty
words,
much what they're
but
getting
I've
at.
also been asked
Yeah.
straight up,
Straight up, yeah.
why didn't I win? And then there are the people who ask it, just like Ryan said, not quite that way, but that's very much what they want to know. Some people have a good attitude about it. They're like, hey, can you just give me some constructive criticism? What are you guys looking for? What do you think would take my car to the next level, aka make it go from what I believe is good to great? And some people are asking not nicely. They're offended, they're angry, and I'm not here to judge all that. Let's just talk about the build. So one example that stands out to me is a guy who came up and said, "Hey, I just want to know what I can do to take my car to that next level." I mean, that's like almost literally verbatim what he said. Seemed to have a good attitude about it. I didn't catch any negative tones or whatever. And so I said, "Okay, which one's yours?" And I walked over, and I wanted to see where his mind was. So I asked him, "Well, once I looked at it, well, what do you think you would need to change?" Now, when I say this is a popular Honda chassis, and it was on not popular wheels of a not popular company. That's about as far as I need to go with that. They're very shiny. Nothing wrong with shiny, but the engine bay was a different color than the car. We just gave examples of how that works. And then there are examples of how it doesn't work. And even if I may not like, or someone may not like the color of the car compared to the color of the engine bay, a good paint job is a good paint job, right? So if an engine bay was prepped and slathered well and painted beautifully in a color that I don't like, I'm still going to appreciate that it was executed well, that it was painted well. And this wasn't painted well. I mean, was it horrible? No, but it wasn't painted that well. And they had a selection of parts that, on paper, pretty good, right? This header, this powder coated valve cover, these bolts, these colors, right? But we're giving examples of how on paper you might hate it, but then you love it in real life. And I'm giving an example of how on paper it might actually sound good, but in real life it just didn't work. Now, this is very much subjective. It's subjective. I'm the one who's running the judging, but I'm not the final say. There's all kinds of people and judges, and I'm actually not the one who judged that car. So I felt comfortable having this conversation, because if I'm the one who judged it, it would be a conflict of interest, or I'd have to either be brutally honest or lie. And I'm not going to do either one of those, because, it's an event and it's privy to that, right? So I just wanted to see where the guy was, and I asked him, well, what do you think you need to change? And I just kind of touched on the engine bay. The first two things this person said is, well, I think my engine bay is good the way it is. And I said, okay, what about anything else that you see? And he said, my wheels are great. I said, okay. And then he said, basically, well, you know what? I think I could use new moldings, like new trim. And I was like, okay, I like that, right? He's saying, I like the color and the paint of my car, but I feel like new trim, new plastics, new rubber seals and moldings would really take it to the next level. And he's absolutely right about that. It very much would, because if you have a great paint job and cracked moldings, it ruins it. Or if you have brand new moldings and you put them on a car with a shitty paint job or a faded oxidized paint job, same kind of thing, right? So the two things I found most fascinating is this not all that amazing, even remotely amazing set of wheels and engine bay are the first two things that he said he didn't need to change.
Right. He thought that was fine.
He said those things are fine. So that there you go, my friends. That is an example of how, in a person's mind, those were the better parts of his car. And in my mind, those were some of the things that were holding him back. This is where it's relative, of course, right? Now, if you're just building for yourself, then you guys just build for yourself, right? We've said it before. Ryan, at the end of that one last episode, he said, don't let what we're saying make you change what you're going to do. You do it. But you can't do that and then wonder why other people might not like it. You have to be okay with that, right? Art is subjective. All art is. So you have this idea of colors and integrating colors and mixing and matching colors, and how there's a thin line between going too far with that, right? And, we're talking about, color coordination. That ties into everything now, right? Let's take, for example, the bolts, right? You have companies that exist solely to provide you the ability to quote unquote dress up your setup, your engine bay. Like you take Downstar, for example, right? People were starting to buy these beauty washers and bolts, and it started to become a thing. And Frank started a long time ago to decide to try to create these kits, right? For people to have the option. And it was such a slow thing before. And now Downstar is a normal name in the industry.
It's one of the couple options. And it's right there at the top.
Right there at the top. And you can get any color combination you want. You can now with titanium and burnt and raw and any color you could imagine, and hex versus Allen, etc. But the point is this, right? Somebody before, way before, when they took their engine out, maybe not even take the engine out, they were just looking at it, had to take their fender off, change their valve cover, who knows, right? Somebody said, damn, these bolts are rounded a little bit, they're rusting a little bit, this car is 5, 7, 10, 20 years old. And so someone said, I should probably clean these. And I don't know, Simple Green, soap, Ajax, and like a steel brush, probably just clean their bolts, right? We all have the presence of mind to use anti-seize. So you're not going to put anti-seize on a rusted out bolt, so you either clean it or something. Someone else said, man, I don't care. It came out and it's going to go back in. People do that all the time. Suspension bolts, it's underneath the car, who cares, right? Dust it off real quick, gun it back in. Okay. There's the person that says, put the bolt that I just took out right back in place. Just put it back. Then there's the person who says, let me clean these real quick, right? Brush them off real quick. Then there's the person who says, let me throw all of these in a bin of like hot soapy water. That'll clean up the threads. Someone else says, let me soak them in Rusties, right? Rust off. And then another person says, well, they came zinced. The zinc's faded.
Re-zinc them.
Let me look up where to find zinking places. And then zinc them, right? They tumble them, they acid dip them, they whatever, right? Zinc them. So then this person has a car put back together. All of the people I just named, the one who says just use it, clean it, brush it, zinc it, doesn't matter. All the cars are going to go back together the same way. So why does it matter? For the bolts underneath the car, it doesn't matter visually, but it matters to you, right? It's a matter of you going that extra step. So somebody said, all of these on my fenders and headlights and this and that are this one size. Let me go find some type of cool looking Allen head or button head. And that spawned an entire industry.
Yeah, so they went from maybe re-zinking, maybe buying brand new from Honda,
buying
or
brand
from
new.
wherever.
We mentioned the ATS guys seeing a chrome head
That's
OEM
right.
Honda
Last time
Bolt
we mentioned
and started
that.
using a
Using
bunch of those,
right? And then it went to, okay, well, let's just buy something. Let's buy something that's readily available as a kit, like Frank's. And that's a great option. I mean, the other option is to like do like an ARP or like, but I mean, it's still all within the same range.
The idea is going from good to great in ways in which the vehicle is going to function identically, changing your bolt to a new bolt or a different bolt does not change anything functionally, but it is a detail, and the details absolutely matter. And I think that's what makes a car stand out. I mean, I mentioned last time how you don't need to have a crazy, wild, rotisserie built vehicle. Um, I use Jonathan Wong's EF. It's just the right combination of parts that are from a style that are just simply timeless.
Mm-hmm.
It can't go out of style, right? It's just simple and clean, and it can't go out of style, and it's relatively mild. But then we were talking about another EF that is the absolute opposite of that, but people love that for all of the same but yet different reasons, and that's Higgins.
Yeah. So Higgins, for
Higgins
example,
built EF.
if you think about that one has all the like bling parts. When if you break that car down, you're like, okay, it's got the Bolt Boys hardware and the typical stuff that all the guys are using for that detail,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But then he's got like, instead of just plumbing his valve cover, like he plumbed the valve cover very loud, let's call it, like
Okay.
big giant vent lines that make a big impact.
Uh-huh.
But then he used the XRP HS79, right? So that's going to be one that's very pricey. So it's like the baller premium plumbing,
Yes.
right? Also, it's flexible and it works very, very well. But like just those kind of details, he has a big canister for the ventilation.
Yeah, it's actually a black vibrant one.
Yeah, black vibrant
Right,
one
with the XRP
that's
going to
very like loud and very like it's CNC'd and just looks great, and it's got a presence in the bay in itself. What else? Oh, he has one of our titanium coil pack covers.
Yep.
And that like definitely blings it out, like it brings a lot of depth to it.
Because
And
the
then-
car's all white, like entirely white.
Right. So then that standout color, right? And then what he did was it's funny, he asked me if it was okay if he did it. His valve cover is the Desert Sage metallic that I had done matching that same plumbing.
Yes.
And it just goes, dude.
Absolutely.
Like that, the colors play off. And then there's like yellow in the green HS79 plumbing. And there's yellow wiring harness tags. So then
Yes.
there's like that little pop of
These
yellow.
little tiny pieces of yellow. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
it makes a huge impact.
I mean, the car's wild. Porsche brakes, gutted
that
out
are also done
in the color.
in that green sage.
in that green color. And it's just a crazy, crazy type of setup, which is all the way over here compared to this other example of an EF, both of which are very memorable. And people will, I would think, are going to remember them for a long time.
Yeah.
So one's subtle, one is not. One is quiet, one is loud, right? One is K, one is B. You guys see how, of course, right? The spectrum of what is memorable is huge. But what we're talking about here is planning and details, color coordination, and kind of executing a vision, right? And that's why one of the biggest pieces of advice, like we both talked about this, was like I said, write it down. Like
Yeah.
you need to right click and save your life away so you can reference photos of the builds that you love wherever you find the photos. Or, if you're on social media, however you save that, I don't know how people do that. Bookmark it, screenshot it, whatever you do, right?
Press two buttons.
Press
That's what
two
I do.
buttons, right? And then, but aside from photos, you have to decide what you're gonna do. People ask me all the time, how do I make my build better or my prelude? A lot of prelude guys, and I always ask them, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm just like, well, when you say make your build better than what?
Right.
Like better than it is? Better than someone else's? Like you want to make it the best. The best of what? Right? The best paint job? The best I need to know where their mind is. So that's why I ask if one of you guys is watching right now. I don't do that to give you a hard time. I'm doing that so I can understand where your mind is. Because if you don't have a specific goal, how am I going to help you get there? How are you going to help yourself get there, right? When Ryan has customers that call, like you probably have 10 million examples of customers who call, and you can tell they are literally trying to buy the bare minimum, and they're not trying to understand anything. They just want you to tell them how to do it.
Yeah, just tell me how to do it.
Just
Yeah.
tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
And there's a thin line between customer service and I'm not a build tech line.
Yeah, like what's the goal of the vehicle?
Right.
You know?
And a lot of people don't know how to answer that.
We have guys that call in that they want to do the lemons racing. You know what
Okay.
this is?
Yeah.
Where you're literally just going out to a circle track.
Yes.
We used to call them the circle jerkers. Let's not repeat that to any of those customers. But no, we're like, oh, we got another circle jerker, because we didn't even understand this racing, right?
I see.
They're in a circle track and they're crashing into each other, like,
Yes.
calling it lemons racing. And like, this was like 10 years ago and I had no idea what this even was. So
Right,
we were
right.
like, we got another one of these guys. We don't know what they're doing with these cars. Anyway, they're literally racing their cars to
Yes.
destroy them.
Yes.
But they need wiring packages. They don't know what they need, but we're selling them these packages just to get the engines running.
Yes.
But yeah, so like they're telling me exactly what they are using that car for.
Yes.
And we go, this is what we recommend.
Yes.
But then you got the guy that's just like, I just want to make it
Like
better. What do I do?
I'm trying to tuck my bay. What do I need? And you're just like,
and you're like, wait, is it a daily driver? Like,
like
should you be tucking your bay?
yeah.
Did your friend just do it? Are you trying to just go?
Is it for the look? Are you trying to fit something that
maybe you're
won't
just
fit?
trying to outdo your buddy?
Sure.
And
And
that's
if that's what it is,
that's perfectly
exactly.
fine.
If that's what it is, just own that. Just say that, and then hell, pull up a picture of the car you're trying to outdo,
Be like, I want it better than this.
and then you can go about hitting each of the points there. But I feel like the reason why we're answering it in this kind of way, you guys, is because we're not here to tell you how to build your car. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're just taking things that we have read and seen, experienced, built, watched, and sharing it in a way so that you can take from that and do with this information how you want to apply it to your build presently or in the future.
I got one.
Okay.
So I remember this was like 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Had a couple guys calling. I think I was also mentioning to Rodrez about this. Like, he was talking to me about it. So the 84 to 87 Honda Prelude.
Okay.
Okay. I think Rodrez was talking to me about, like, he was getting people saying, why aren't any of these old Preludes in Honda tuning? Okay. And then immediately after that, because that was when I had my little tech column, and I was a bit more like, once, Honda tuning was still a thing.
Sure,
it hadn't
sure.
gotten under yet, and it was still kind of at the top. There was a couple guys that were calling. They were customers. They wanted to like buy stuff, and there was exactly that. They were like, "Why aren't these old Preludes in Honda tuning?
the
Why
magazine.
can't can I basically buy enough parts from you to have my car be good enough to get it into the magazine?" And I was like, they're like, "Why are none of these cars in there?" And I'm like, there's no bias of those cars. Like, Matt from Honda Tuning, Rodrez, is not like, oh, I don't like 84 to 87
Right.
Preludes.
And so if a good one comes, we're not going to
We're
post.
not,
That's just not how that
or
was.
because nobody wants to read about those.
Right.
That's not how it was. It was that either he never saw a one that was good enough to be in the book, or nobody showed him one that was good enough to
Mhm.
be in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't probably take much, but none of them were even good yet,
Sure.
let alone great. And then, coincidentally enough, I had a customer.
Yeah.
He ordered like a tucked radiator and an engine harness, I want to say. And I think he did like a coil on plug.
I know exactly which car
and
you're talking
it's
about.
red.
Yeah.
And he really broke down the barrier for that chassis of a car.
Yeah. Beautiful third gen.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And he actually drove it here one time.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was
From far.
from far. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
and
I don't remember what state, but
but
far.
I kept in touch with him because he would order a couple things every now and then, or like, oh, like my fan broke or something random would happen. And then he's like, I need another one, or can you warranty it, or whatever the case may be. But I had like interacted with him a few more times. And he got shot for Honda tuning, and
and it was featured.
It was a great
It was a
car.
beautiful car. Yeah.
And it was simple. It was red. It had some like I don't know what wheels were on Volks, something
Back then, I don't remember. I think they were CEs.
I don't remember what they were. Probably CEs or TEs or something. Like black with red, so it contrasted nice. H22 or F20B, I forgot.
Yep, yep.
Coilover plug, some standalone ECU, engine bay, headlight wiring was tucked. He had one of the tucked radiators. He had like some nice plumbing, and the car was very well put together.
Very well
And
put together.
It didn't
Fresh, crisp red.
It didn't take much. It was just dark accented blacks with the red.
With the red.
It was perfect.
And didn't try to do all crazy wheel fitment. Didn't try to do too much. Just a very beautiful car.
Did Matt put that one on the cover, actually?
I don't know if that was on the cover.
I don't know if it was on the cover, but it was very memorable, and like everybody really, really liked the car.
Yeah, to this day. And so there you go, right? An unorthodox chassis or an unlike chassis, but with the same kind of premise. Planning, beautiful color, quality work, quality paint, and there you go. It got featured in the magazine. So, from the spectrum, right? It doesn't matter the chassis. It doesn't matter about those types of things. What matters is that there is planning and details and execution, and that should start to make a little bit more of a sense to the people perhaps that don't quite have that yet. And there's nothing wrong with that, because nobody necessarily it just figures it all out instantly, or you're born with that. Like, it takes you studying and reading. Before, we read the magazines and we're on the forums. Now it's social media. But there's all of these examples for you to take inspiration from, and you can see the one that has presence. We all can say when a car has presence, like, oh man, that car it kind of just grabs your attention. Why? Right? Try to figure it out. Whichever car you've seen, anywhere you've seen it that really stood out to you and was memorable, just stop for a moment and try to figure out why. And the answer is, it'll come to you, and you'll start to be able to figure out what it was about it that made you remember it. And so from there, you'll be able to apply that to your own build. So, we'll come back and we'll bring up a few more examples to kind of help put it into perspective. And when you guys look them up, you'll be able to look over those builds and see what we're talking about, okay? So when we come back, we'll do that. See you guys in a bit.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Ryan from Rywire here, and today I have something really, really cool to show you. What I want to show you guys is that nothing that I'm doing here is so far-fetched that you guys can't do it at home. We don't have any CNC, there's no 5-axis machine here. I'm literally just using my brain and hand tools to get a really, really cool project done. Even in the most basic conditions, a beautiful outcome can arise.
Think Bigger podcast. This is a branch of the Think Bigger project that is a brand and a movement and an ideology that was created to better the community and the culture around it. How you behave in your relationships, how you build a car, how you do anything comes from the way that you think. And if you can start there, then everything else will follow. All right, you guys, welcome back. So we're discussing all of these different things, part 2 of what makes a build go from good to great. We gave you a couple of examples and ideas of things to address, builds to look at. And, we have other examples that come to mind, right? Mm-hmm. What about you, Ryan? What's another example that comes to mind?
Well, I like to think about things that, like, I don't know, maybe aren't the obvious. Remember when we were at IMX?
Oh, yes, Indonesia.
Just last year, or not last year, when was it?
That was 18, actually.
18, okay, 18 when you and I were there. There was a yellow RX-7, and, you normally think, like, RX-7s, it might even be easy to just, like, import a Japanese one with a bunch of parts already on it, right? But in where we were located in Indonesia, it's really hard for them to get some of these Japanese parts, and it's a premium.
Mm-hmm,
like way over what it would cost to get in the United States.
Yeah.
Right? So this car was like really well put together. All the things that he had were like I'm saying, like impossible to get over there. Really high duties. The car was super clean. Everything was just meticulously done. And we didn't even pick it like to be the best, because the way that the whole system worked is that we basically picked our premium candidates, and those candidates, what was it? It was 5 cars, five individuals.
Yes.
They would then choose, and it's funny because that was the one that I like low key wanted to win. I thought it was the best put together car with the most extreme details. The guy was just, those guys over there are very animated, which they want you to know one, how hard it is to get some stuff, which it's the truth. And that's one of the reasons why we do need to to know this information.
Sure.
Because, you think about it like, oh, well, it's not that hard over here, but in a different environment, it's going to be totally different. So, a lot of the guys explain their car and what they did custom and what they hand built, and the parts that are available, the parts that are not.
And you guys, there are some crazy cars, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, they were the
stuff.
vans and these like Euro cars. I mean, really, really amazing.
But this guy's attention to detail with every little tiny Japanese thing, the car itself, everything. Like, I mean, I don't know how many RX-7s are driving around there, but there's very, very few.
There's very few. No, but here's the thing, though, right? So I think one thing that one of the points that we're trying to make is that the car was very meticulous and very beautiful, but there was nothing revolutionary about this RX-7 at all. Now, the choices, right? The execution of it, beautiful. On paper, that would seem like a very just pretty nice RX-7. But in the context of what we're talking about, it ended up standing out so amazingly because of where in the world, geographically, it was, what they had to go through to get all of these parts to make it look like a moderately modified RX-7 sitting in a parking lot in Japan.
Right.
Right?
It was like fully addressed with all the goodies that you could ever think of. And the guy probably we're talking like nerding out on pictures and magazines and, screenshotting your phone. That guy was probably just like
there
a library of
way more RX-7s that are built crazier and even nicer than his. But we're talking about
demographically
aimed to execute a perfect mid to moderately modified RX-7 just like how it would be sitting in Japan. And our other judge that year was one of the tops from Osaka Automesse.
Yeah, well, he was essentially the one that runs the whole thing.
Okay, so he
was Osaka Automesse.
He is, yeah, I mean, so he has the boss above him, which I think is more just the financier, and he is Osaka Automesse, right? So for those of you that may not know what that is, you know what TAS is, Tokyo Auto Salon. That's obviously the biggest Japanese car gathering. The second biggest one is Osaka Automesse. Now, that's a very prestigious gentleman to be the fellow judge.
Most definitely.
So coming from this side of the planet to that section of the planet, he comes from Japan, and we are the three judges. I mean, very, very, very amazing compliment for us to be working with him. And when we did that, he had to have a translator. But when we talked with him, one of the arguments that we were making, I think I was like really trying to drive this home, was I believe his translator said, he's all, but this is just a very regular, normal
very
RX-7.
Regular, well-done car
Regular
in Japan
RX-7.
And then we were like...
And I said,
but it's
yes,
not Japan.
right, but he did it so that you, from Japan, will say that, but we're here, and the difficulty in executing it. So it doesn't look like, oh, this person is trying to make this car look like a Japanese daily driver. No one said that. It just hit the nail on the head. So when we said, hey, well, yes, you're right, it does look like a regular nice Japanese RX-7, but we're here, and the effort it took to get it to that, and he said, I agree. He thought about it, and then not even with the translator, remember that? He was just like, I agree, because we were just saying, if it was in Japan, it would just be a nice car, and I'm sure people would like it. But where we are to make it look like that. So the whole point in bringing that up is an example of how, on paper, that was not a wild RX-7. There are wild RX-7s, like good wild, not bad wild. And this was not one of those. It wasn't about that, right? Another example of a car, back here to the United States, that is not wild by any means is Jason Harridan's EG. Now, you guys, please look him up. You can see the EG. the color, the color combination on different wheels, right? Brushing metal, um,
Powder
choosing
coating.
blacks, like
Yeah.
multiple blacks, like powder coating samples over and
To try to
over.
match if it was a brand new bracket or
Yes, to
bolt
get
or
like
whatever it
the
is.
right texture and tone of black to make it look like OEM. So you have this whole engine bay setup that's addressed with the same amount of detail as the best, but you're going to think of it as more like you'll look in it and it's like a restoration. Because if you don't know any better, it's going to look like it was simply restored, but it wasn't just restored.
It's almost like a if we were back in like 93 and it was a paint to sample car.
Correct.
That's like what it would look like.
Correct.
A paint to sample, B series option.
Yes.
That's how it would have been.
Yeah, like that's like it's like OEM plus plus because it's all OEM parts for the most part, but they're all very, very much coordinated and subdued and addressed with a level of detail. We've kind of said this before. You do a lot of work to make it look like you didn't do that much work. And that's one of these EGs where, yes, the wheels, people will like them. Yes, when you look underneath and you see maybe the suspension or how clean it is, you'll appreciate that. But when you really start looking over a stock 92 to 95 Civic, 5th gen, and then you look at his, you'll start to really understand where all of this came together. And that's an example of how, it doesn't have to be the wildest on paper, right? It doesn't have to have the brightest color. It doesn't have to be the most horsepower, the lowest, etc. for it to stand out, right? If you're aiming for attention, all of the aforementioned are the ways to get it. But if you're talking about, separating the boys from the men, going from good to great, it is patience and execution and details. I mean, it just really doesn't get any more simple than that. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
I think that's pretty much 100% accurate.
So, a lot of people always talk about prelude this, prelude that, and I always tell them a chassis is just a canvas, right? SEMA, TAS, people will take just pick a chassis, right? People can do anything. It's just a matter of what the execution of the vision is, right? So stop focusing so much on the chassis and focus on what you're going to create with that. It's a canvas. You want to create your art, create it on the canvas, right? Another way that you can do that, people used to have all these custom parts. I mean, the first time Ryan made a tucked radiator, it was straight custom. My first radiator, like 15 years ago, it was like drawing and templates and add a bung here and, dual pass this way and make it this high. But these are not cheap things, right? And as we've evolved, you see now basically this kind of like custom shelf items.
Yeah, that's a good way
Right?
to put it. Yeah.
Custom shelf items. Before,
It's like our wiring harnesses.
exactly. So if you wanted a custom, well, there you go, an engine harness that was, a disconnect plug and ran this way instead of that way and had labels, that was handmade.
And the price points on that would probably have
Were-
been 3 times
Yeah,
the amount.
yeah.
And
So now you can get a harness that used to be literally 15 hours of hand making a harness. And now you have that same spec because of a person like Ryan, who's created a company where I know this particular year has this sensor, this particular year doesn't, this one could go this way, this alternator plug, this ECU, etc., 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 and created a custom shelf item, which now you can have. In the case of wiring, your car will last like 50 years. Brand new plugs and wires and pins, and it's perfect. But there's also now custom shelf items like swirl pots, surge tanks, radiators, overflow tanks, breather systems. The stuff that people used to have custom brackets for coil on plug. Now they just, anything you could almost imagine. And with the right combination, you can make your build go from okay to good and then from good to great without spending grandiose numbers. I think a lot of times it sounds like he who has the most mods, and that's not true at all. There are a lot of people with a lot of modifications. It doesn't hit the same. Half the cars we've referenced were not highly modified. They were properly modified. They were executed well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you guys? So if that does, let us know in the comments if you think that we hit the nail on the head. If you think that we are out of our fucking minds and we just
Are
didn't,
super biased.
and we're biased and we didn't make any sense. And if that's how you feel, not even mad at you. Put it in the comments and just share your perspective. If there's a car that you think better embodied some of the examples of what we were saying, share it. Because if we don't know them, we would love to. Because at the end of the day, we are absolute car heads and fans. So if there's a build that you think we should know about, tell us. Okay? So let us know, you guys. We appreciate you as always. Thank you for being here with us. And we'll see you on the next
See you
episode
next time.
of Car Talk.